Hi everyone, how have you been? It's a free day at the World Chess Championship. Are you also missing the game as much as I do? There's no Carson Karyakin today. What do you think about the games that they have played before, the previous 4 games? Let me know in the chat or on YouTube in the comments. I was especially impressed by the last 2 games where Carson had an advantage and he was pushing and pushing and pushing and he could not win those 2 games. It's interesting to see what will happen in the coming games because on the one hand, Sergei must be feeling great that he could defend those horrible positions, in my opinion. I'm sure that many of us, if not all of us, would have lost it. But for Magnus, I think it's also tough because he knows that he had an advantage. He knows that normally he would convert those positions and he could not win them. So I don't know who is feeling better or worse. Definitely it's better to be attacking during a game, but psychologically, maybe it is Sergei who is feeling better because he survived. He's feeling fantastic. And on the other hand, as I said, Magnus has to forget those games and he should push again. He should believe that he can convert advantages. So tell me if you agree with me. Tell me if you think that Magnus will manage to win the next games, or it is Sergei who now has the psychological edge and he's going to surprise all of us by not only defending but also attacking Magnus. Today we are not going to discuss their games. That was our last edition, the Carlsen Karyakin special edition of Miss Strategy's Middlegame show. I decided that since we have all been talking about the World Chess Championship, we will give a free day to ourselves as well today, and we will talk about an event that finished lately, and there were so many strong players. This is the European Club Cup. I will try to bring up the website of the European Club Cup. Were you following the event? I think normally many of us loves to follow such strong events where all these top clubs have 2700 GMs on almost all the boards, if not all the boards literally. So there were so many superstars playing this tournament, but at the same time of the European Club Cup, the World Chess Championship started and also the Champions Showdown in St. Louis. So 3 major events at the same time. It was not easy to follow all of them. Therefore, I decided that we will discuss 2 games from the European Club Cup. In this picture you see the winners, the top 3 clubs of the men's section. And, well, some players did very well. For instance, Vasily Ivanchuk and Peter Svidler. And others are not so happy, like Maxim Vachier-Lagrave and Levon Aronian. You can check on the website of the European Club Cup how they all did, all these top players. And let's see those 2 games that I have selected that I really loved from a strategic point of view. The first one you can already see is the victory of IM Mamedyarov over Maxim Vachier-Lagrave. So we are playing with the white pieces. And let's just go through the opening quickly as usual. We will focus on the middle game. And that's where you will need to start thinking. So this is a Grunfeld with a g3, a symmetrical position as you can see, which is normally pretty solid. After c4, c6, finally it's not exactly the same for both sides. And queen b3, queen b6. Well, those of you who play these lines, I'm sure that you understand these moves, but in case you are not a Grunfeld player or you don't play d4 as white, let me just pause here for a moment because it might look weird. What are those queens doing on b3 and b6, right? Nobody minds in this position doubling pawns. So black played queen b6 because black wants white to capture on b6, double his pawns on the b file, but at the same time doubling means opening the a file for his rook. So suddenly this a8 rook is very strong, unlike the a1 rook. And the pawn on a2 can become a weakness. Normally white pushes this pawn to a3, but there's a very nice semi-open file for the black rook on a8. The same goes for white, because after queen b3, queen b6, white normally plays knight c3, developing his knight and not caring about queen takes b3. So once again, white doesn't mind doubling pawns on the b file, and now it is white who has an active rook, regardless this bad structure. We have already talked about doubled pawns many times. You must remember that they have pros and cons. So yes, it's a structural weakness, but at the same time, if they are not isolated from the rest of the pawn chain, then it's not so easy to attack them. And here on b3, well, this pawn could become weak if black had a way to attack it. I think I slightly moved the board. I'm a bit clumsy as usual. I'm not sure I can fix this, can I? Let me try. Did I manage? No, I'm cutting the board. I might need help. I might need help. No, let's try. Let's try to be moving the board. Cross fingers that I managed to place back the whole board and the name of Vachier Mamedyarov. Why I can't see it? Oh my. Yeah, this IT stuffs are not my favorite. I really don't know why I cannot place it there. At least you are seeing all the pieces, aren't you? So yeah, it's not so bad. Imagine the name down there is Vachier Mamedyarov, and once I have a special guest, I might have a special guest soon, he might be able to help me with fixing the board. In the meantime, let's discuss this position. So double pawns can have advantages and disadvantages. Disadvantage is the structure. They are doubled. It's not easy to move them, not easy to advance them because they can become very weak. There's no other pawn supporting them unless you imagine like this c4 pawn would need to be here on c2 protecting the b3 pawn, and the b2 pawn would not be able to, black would really need to have this bishop on the long diagonal without the d4 pawn to attack the b2 pawn. This might sound very complicated, but I was trying to discuss with these arrows. What is important is that yes, these are double pawns, they have pros and cons, and that's why here in this position queen b3, queen b6 are very normal moves, and knight c3 very normal moves. So nobody wants to take because nobody wants to activate the opponent's rook. It's better to have active pieces and a double pawn. Rook d8, rook d1, these are also normal moves because the pawns that can be problematic are the d5 and the d4 pawns. That's where both players are hitting. Bishop f5, and now a move that might look weird once again for those who don't play these lines, knight e1. The point is that after knight e1, finally our g2 bishop is attacking too. So look at these. We are attacking the d5 pawn with 4 pieces. So black has to do something about the d5 pawn. He cannot play knight b d7 because he would lose his pawn. Why I'm drawing that with green? Yeah, today with the arrows I'm kind of clumsy, as well as with the IT stuffs. Please excuse me. So this is a moment where black has to do something about the d5 pawn. And that's where black usually takes on c4. But this is what white wants. After queen takes c4, knight a6. This knight, it looks ugly on a6, but it is heading to b4. And also it allows black to prepare the push c5. So the point of all this knight e1 and putting a lot of pressure on the d5 pawn was that we can finally get the center. We have these two beautiful central pawns, e4 and d4, and a lot of space. We are very comfortable as white, except for the e1 knight, but we will activate it, and the rest of the pieces on the queen side, of course. Bishop e6, queen a4, so after queen b4, knight c2, finally the knight is coming, and white doesn't mind exchanging queens because he's not afraid. He has, as I said before, a very nice central, a very good control of the center. The knight has finally stepped away from e1. White still needs to develop the bishop. It can go to many squares, and the rook from a1 will also need to be activated. As for black, he has to regroup his pieces. The knight on a6 is not very nice, so he has to do something about that. He cannot go to b4 because of the knight on c2, so it's actually very useful to have our knight on c2 at the moment, protecting the d4 pawn and also avoiding knight b4, as the black knight cannot go there. It could jump to c7, but that's not as active as knight b4. So black goes knight d7, opening the diagonal of the bishop, and after bishop g5, finally developing our bishop and attacking the weak pawn on e7, rook e8. b3 is a move that I love. You know that I sometimes choose very awkward moves. I mean, it's not awkward, but it's just a very tiny little step with the pawn from b2 to b3. But I think it's kind of elegant. That you push the pawn to b3, you take away the c4 square from the black bishop, and you also protect your a2 pawn. Because without pushing the pawn to b3, you cannot really activate the rook. This pawn on a2 will always be hanging. So b3 takes away squares from the black pieces and also lets your white rook to be activated. After knight b6, that was the idea of knight d7, opening the bishop's diagonal and also bringing this knight to b6 to exchange it for the knight on a4. Knight takes b6, a takes b6. Yes, doubled pawns, but this rook on a8 is not as active as it would have been in the opening because there's a knight on a6, right? Rook ac1, finally we have finished development and soon it will be your turn to think because we will reach the critical moment, which is here, after knight c7. Now our pawn is hanging on a2, so you, as white, should decide what you do about this pawn. I tell you the options. You can either defend it or prevent, with a defensive move, the capture of the a2 pawn, or you can choose to counterattack. But if you choose that, you need to tell me how do you counterattack in this position. Let's see, I give you a bit of time for that. Good job, everybody! It is the move d5, so we don't care about the a2 pawn, we are attacking. Let's take the initiative, d5. And yes, what we want is to take advantage of this c7 knight. Black has just placed his knight on c7 and we are already taking advantage of it. So yes, we are attacking the e6 bishop and at the same time we want to open the c file to attack the knight and this c6 pawn. If black goes bishop g4, then now we should play f3, if not our pawn on a2 will be lost. Attacking the bishop and after bishop c8, by the way, why bishop c8, why not bishop d7? There's no tactics going on, the simple point is that if bishop d7, we take on c6 and now the bishop is hanging on d7 because of the rook on d1 as well. So black has to take back with the bishop and this is what you don't want. Doubled pawns like this, because now this is bad. Those pawns are doubled and isolated. I always emphasize it a lot that that is real weakness. And the trouble is that for black, this isn't the worst thing in the position. The worst thing in the position for black are these two pieces, especially the knight on c7, which is unprotected. So we can play knight b4 as white, we protect the a2 pawn and attack the c6 bishop. The bishop cannot go away because the knight would be hanging on c7. So we are basically winning a pawn because of this pin on the c file. That's why bishop g4, f3, bishop c8 has to be played, which is a really ugly move. It has to be played. And here we play knight b4, protecting the a2 pawn and attacking the c6 pawn once again. I love moves that are multifunctional. We attack and defend at the same time. These are really cool moves. This is not what Vachier played. After d5 he decided he prefers to take this pawn and after e takes, bishop g4. Now we don't have to go after bishop g4 we don't have to go f3. We can simply move the rook. And you tell me what's the point. Why black cannot capture the a2 pawn this really quickly, because I know that you see it. Good job. I think it was Goragog and SP Quittert who said it first. Knight b4 is the point, so let's just place it on the board. Rook takes a2, loses to knight b4. Both the rook and the knight are hanging. That was the big point behind d5. Obviously, Vachier did not blunder his piece. He goes knight b5, activating the knight. Now the pawn is still hanging on a2. What would you do here? Would you protect this pawn, or would you try to do something more active? Actually, it can be done with one single move, both. Let's see if you get what I'm trying to say. What would you play here? That's all. Tell me that. That is actually the correct move, but not the best move order. But it takes a player like Vachier Mamedyarov, of course, to see these very tiny differences between one move and the other. So we want to play a4, but after a4, the black knight will jump to c3, most likely. And now he's threatening knight e2. That's nasty. So we will play a4, but first let's make sure that black's pieces are less active. After knight b5, white goes first h3, because the bishop on g4 is well placed. And after h3, he cannot keep this bishop on g4. Why don't we do it the other way around? a4, knight c3, threatening knight e2 check, right? So here we cannot go h3 because knight e2 wins the exchange. And we don't want to play f3 because yes, we avoid knight e2 check, we are not losing material here, but the move f2, f3 closes the diagonal of the g2 bishop. We would love to have the diagonal open. We don't want to close it. We want to have this bishop as active as possible. That's why after knight b5, h3 is the correct move. We chase away the g4 bishop and keep the g2 bishop very active. Now, when the bishop moves, it went back to d7, we go a4. So yes, you found the correct move, but of course it takes a top 10 player, well, top 20 right now, I believe, to make such moves, or to be a grandmaster at least, to see all these tiny differences. So don't be disappointed if you did not say h3. I also thought that a4 was the correct move. I just wanted to show you one thing after h3, because bishop d7 might look too passive. What about bishop f5? As usual, this is a strategy lesson. There are no tactics here. We are not winning anything. But the point is that after bishop f5, we can go g4. Now these are the moves that you don't usually do when there are queens on the board. So you don't go and weaken your own king. with h3, g4 and all those kind of pawn pushes in front of your own king. But there are no queens. This is heading to an endgame. So here it's okay to push those pawns, and what we do care about is to make the opponent's pieces as passive as possible. So g4 is the best move because it forces the black bishop to retreat or to be exchanged. He can either go back to d7 or trade on c2. What do you think about the trade of these pieces? I think because of the highlighted pieces, you already should understand what I mean. We have a pair of bishops, and this position is not closed. You know that in closed positions, knights are very happy, and in open positions, the bishops are the kings. So here, a pair of bishops is great. The position is kinda open. There are many open files, diagonals, open lines. So we love to have the bishops here. The d5 pawn is strong because it takes lots of squares away from black, and the e7 backward pawn is a weakness. That's our main target here. Once this pawn disappears, we will have a d passed pawn. That's why in this position, bishop takes c2 is a move that only helps white. So Vachier didn't go bishop f5. He goes back to d7 immediately. And now a4, as I already said. That's your move, guys. You guessed it. Knight c3. And once again, a move comes that I like a lot. Knight a3. It looks horrible. The knight looks very ugly on a3. You might hear some background noise. It means that I'm not alone, and there's a very tough blitz battle going on in the living room. You might see later who is playing blitz, and you might be happy about seeing this person, our guest of today. I'm here in the Chess24 studio in Madrid. So yeah, you might guess his nationality. Knight a3 I like because it looks ugly, but at the same time it's a very useful move. To understand how deep this move is, we should see, why don't we just capture the pawn on e7? That should be your first question. Bishop takes e7, right? That pawn is hanging. Why don't we just capture it? The reason is the following. Once again, grandmaster thinking. After rook ac8, black is actually attacking. He's threatening knight a2, and our knight on c2 will end up being in trouble. What if we move the knight now? We go knight b4, let's say. You tell me. This time tactics. Tell me very quickly. You guys are so quick. It is knight e2, so well done everybody. That's a nice tactical motive. Knight e2 check. We sacrifice the knight, but at the same time we are winning the rook on c4. This is an exchange up for black. So here after rook ac8, it's very difficult for white to find a way to defend against everything. Knight a2, as I said, the knight would be hanging on c2, and if the knight jumps, then knight e2. It doesn't mean that white is lost here, but who wants to be in a complicated mess when we have such a pleasant position as white? Don't complicate your life by entering positions that you don't know what's going on there. Let's just make sure that we prevent this. Knight a3 prevents all this, and the reason is the following. If rook ac8 here, we just activate our knight because the knight was ugly on a3, remember? Knight c4 activates the knight, attacks the b6 pawn, and closes the c file. So now there will be no more knight e2 check threatening. We can finally move away with the bishop, because here you see that this bishop is protecting the c1 rook. So at the moment, black was not threatening knight e2 check. This is not a threat at the moment. It is a threat once the bishop goes to a different diagonal. But we want to capture the pawn, so we cannot be just protecting the c1 rook with the bishop all the time. That's why knight a3, knight c4 is the best plan in that position, and I love this move. Together with the move b3, knight a3, knight c4 is also a very deep move. The idea is that you activate the knight, because on c2, look at the knight on c2, it was not your best piece, the knight on c2. That's not normally the square where you place your knight, and you also prevent the knight e2 tactical motive. So now after knight c4, white is winning basically, because you win at least a pawn, the b6 pawn or the e7 pawn. Knight a3, rook a5 was the answer of Vachier to this move, trying to grab the d5 pawn. It is logical, because if the e7 pawn falls, the d pawn will be a very powerful passed pawn, so he wants to capture it. Bishop takes e7, now we take the pawn, and after knight takes d5. Bishop d6 is a very annoying move, because the bishop, first of all, is well placed on d6. It was hanging, so we need to go somewhere. If you need to go somewhere, let's place it somewhere active. On d6, from the square d6, it covers lots of squares. Also, now we are threatening b3, b4, because the d5 knight would be hanging. Well, depends on where our knight on a3 is. Of course, it has to be calculated, but in general, it's a move that is there in the air as an idea. And we also offer the trade of rooks on the e file. This is what happened actually. Rook takes e1 check, rook takes e1, and knight f6. Well, you've got to do something about that. Knight, sooner or later, it's a problem that it's gonna be hanging. So, not b4. I don't know why I was saying b4. Knight c4 is a much bigger threat, because after b4, let's just make any silly move here as black. If b4, rook takes a4, and both knights are hanging. So this is good for black. The problem is not b4, the problem is knight c4. So yes, we are attacking the rook cannot stay on the 5th rank, and the knight will be lost. So you either lose an exchange or you lose your knight. That's why after rook takes e1, the knight has to go. Knight f6 had to be played, but this means that finally this monster on g2 is alive. And we can just simply take this pawn. But once again, IM Mamedyarov plays a move that I like a lot. Because yes, we can capture a pawn once again, but he's not so greedy. He will take the pawn, but first he makes sure that he activates his pieces. Which one is his worst piece? The knight on a3. So let's move it. We can move this knight with a tempo. So if you can activate or improve your pieces with a tempo, let's do it. The rook is hanging, so the pawns will not disappear. Both the b6 and the b7 pawn are hanging. There's just no way to keep both. So white is winning here. It doesn't really matter where the rook goes. If rook a7, we just take the b6 pawn. And look at our pieces. It's not only about the pawn up, it's also that white has a lot better pieces, the piece coordination, and much more active pieces. Look at the rook on a7. That is the worst piece of black for sure. Knight c4, rook a6 was played because, of course, Vachier tries to play as active as possible, not like rook a6 is an active move, but his plan was that after bishop takes b7, rook a7, bishop g2, and now b5. This is something that, even if this game is a game that Vachier lost, we should learn this from Vachier or any other player that shows the same features in worse positions. We have learned about defending worse positions. Remember the how to save the game lesson? That is the attitude. Black is worse. Black is a pawn down and black has passive pieces, so there's not much to hope for. But you should make the opponent's task as difficult as possible. So after knight c4, he thinks, okay, I'm lost. He knows it. But he should still fight. The opponent can make mistakes too. On such a high level, of course, it's less unlikely, but still, you should try. And on our level, come on, you should fight, and you might make a draw or even win from a lost position. That was our Halloween topic. If you haven't seen it, then see the How to Trick Your Opponent, the Halloween edition of the Miss Strategies Middlegame show. So rook a7 and b5, you should try to be active. Activate your pieces, try to create threats, because that will make your opponent make mistakes too. Unfortunately for Vachier-Lagrave Mamedyarov plays the best moves. b5, here if he would have taken, that's what black wanted. After bishop takes b5, it's true that white has a b3 passed pawn, but it's not so easy to promote this pawn. There's a bishop on b5, the a file has been opened for the rook. So this isn't easy at all to convert this position into a full point. That's why after b5, a takes b5 isn't the best move, but bishop c5, attacking the rook and now asking, where do you want to go? If rook c7, which would be logical to attack the bishop, bishop b6, rook c8, and now you keep on attacking the rook, because once you see these pieces, you might be like, okay, the rook has barely any squares left. Yes, it can abandon the back rank, but in general, if he wants to stay on the back rank, he barely has moves. He has to go back to f8. That's horrible, isn't it? Even if he doesn't go back, let's say in this position, bishop c5, rook a6. Yeah, why would you want to be on the back rank? Rook a6 was played by Maxime. But now simply bishop b7. And after, well, b takes c4 is what Maxime played. But even if he moves the rook, rook e6, let's say, this endgame without the rooks is completely lost. Because we don't take on b5. We were chasing away the rook from the a file, and we wanted to trade rooks because simply pushing a5 with the knight hanging on c4. We don't care about that, because after b takes, this pawn promotes with a check. 2 moves and we have a queen, and there's no way to prevent it. Look at our bishops, we are a piece down, but this pawn promotes. That's beautiful, isn't it? How we shield the pawn from being taken. There's no bishop c6, there's just no way to prevent the promotion. So the point is this, that we don't want to take on b5 unless it's winning. Let's just show another position where maybe it could be. Yeah, sorry, I wanted to say that here, after chasing the rook all the way to f8, now we would take the pawn, because of course now it is winning a pawn with the knight on d6. A takes b5 is a good move, because that's a passed pawn that will promote. Look at the b5 pawn, we can push it to b6, we can push it to b7 and to b8. All the path to the promotion is paved by the bishops of white. Bishop pair is so powerful when placed like this. Yes, black has a pair of bishops too, but it's not so useful. They are not as active as white's bishops. So this position is lost no matter what. Bishop c5, there are many ways to play here as black. I just showed 2 of the possible lines. Simply, it's either that black will lose because he's losing the b5 pawn, or he will lose because he ends up in an endgame that's lost. Vachier tried to sacrifice an exchange. After bishop b7 he goes b takes c4, and when bishop takes a6, c takes b3, at least he has a passed pawn too. And after a5, bishop f5, this is the last trick. The idea is of course b2 and promoting with b1. It can be prevented with several moves. Mamedyarov plays bishop d4, which is probably the most simple reaction. You just avoid b2, and then you will once again go back to b7 with your bishop and promote your a pawn. This is an exchange up, and black resigned because there's just no point to play this position where you have to give up a piece for the a pawn of white. I hope that you like this game. I especially like the play of Mamedyarov after b3, this tiny little move that allows your white rook to be activated, also takes away the c4 square from the bishop. And after that, the move that you have found, you all have said that after knight c7 we don't care about the hanging pawn on a2, but we go for the attack with d5, and that's where black's trouble began. After c takes and bishop d4, rook e1, and white's pieces are so much more active. Here after knight b5, h3 was a very accurate move that most of us would have missed. And here when bishop d7, now a4, knight c3, and the other move that I really like, knight a3, preventing all the mess that would have happened after bishop takes e7, rook c8. This you should learn from the game, that do not end up in positions that are a mess. When you have a very comfortable position, don't be in a rush winning material. Just keep your advantage by improving your pieces. As long as you are improving your pieces, you are heading in the right direction. So knight a3, knight c4 is a good move. Even if you would not win a pawn with these moves, that is a good move. That's an improvement. Don't end up in a messy position just for trying to immediately materialize your advantage. It's better to have a positional advantage than a pawn up or 2 pawns up in a completely crazy position. Unless you love crazy positions. Who knows, maybe you enjoy those positions. I like to control what's going on the board. Let's see the other game that I have selected. It is a game by Pepe Svidler, our very own Pepe Svidler, who is commentating on the World Chess Championship. I'm sure that you were listening to his commentary with Eric Hansen. And here he's white, and he will beat my favorite opening. So this is the How to Destroy the French Defense, presented by Pepe Svidler. e4, e6, d4, d5, and I would love to speak about the opening when it's the French defense especially, but this is a middle game show, so I will not do that. I will just stop at the moment. This is all theory. Don't try to understand it if you don't play it. This is theory. After knight d1, well, there are many other moves too, but knight d1, the point is that white wants to exchange queens, because this, even though it's a slight edge for white, it's not a big deal, this position, it's slightly better for white, it's a very comfortable advantage. I also like to play this position as white when I'm facing my own favorite opening, the French defense, because there's not much risk here. You can play this for a win, of course, as white, but you're not risking much, so in worst case you make a draw. And why is it so comfortable? It is comfortable because black has to take on d4 if he wants to do something. So he has to free the c5 square for the rest of his pieces, and he cannot keep the d4 pawn there, because then it would mean just a very strong, very powerful central pawns for white. So after c takes, knight takes, bishop takes, let's just stop here for a moment. Actually, before I talk about this position, I would like to see your thoughts on this position. Why is it so comfortable for white? Why do you think that this position in general, without moves? Let's try to analyze this position a bit. I give you a bit of time for that. What do you think about this position? I've seen some very good thoughts there in the chat, so let's sum up what you guys have said, and also in general what is going on usually in French type of positions. So positions that arise from the French defense. This pawn structure is very typical for the French defense, that white has a pawn on e5, also sometimes on d4 or on f4, and black has pawns on e6 and d5. This means that white has space advantage. So first of all, it is more comfortable to play this as white because you have more space. Secondly, the bishop is really cool on d4, and that's supposed to be the bad bishop of white. Because if you imagine, let's imagine a pawn on d4, alright? That's not a bishop, that's a pawn. And the black bishop, why I'm saying black all the time? So, once again, imagine a white pawn on d4 and the white bishop on e3. You see that pawn structure with pawns on d4, e5, f4? That would mean that the white bishop on e3 is really just not active. It is inside the pawn structure, it doesn't have really an open diagonal. That's why now this bishop is happy, because we have traded pawns on d4, and finally this is not a bad bishop at all. It is a very nice bishop, having a very nice diagonal. And also in d4, it supports the e5 pawn for ideas with the push f4, f5. That's more concrete, but I have seen you guys mentioning f4, f5. It's possible to play for f5 in the future. In general, white wants to play on the king side, and black wants to play on the queen side. It's logical because of how the pawns are. I always say that these kind of pawns, when they are fixed in the center, they are pointing at somewhere. So e6, d5 are pointing to the queen side, and well, d4, there's no d4 pawn now, and e5 would be pointing towards the king side. White usually wants to attack on the king side and black on the queen side. Also logical because of the c5, that's a semi-open file for black. Black's pieces, the worst piece of black is usually, almost always in the French defense, is the c8 bishop, because it cannot move. The same reason as it would have been with an e3 bishop and pawn on d4 for white, but this is worse because black has less space, so it's unlikely that this e6 pawn will just disappear and suddenly the bishop could move to f5. That e6 pawn is normally just there for the whole game. So the black bishop on c8 is really passive. It is a challenge for all the French players, as I am, to somehow activate this bishop, and one way to activate it is by first of all deleting all the arrows that I have drawn because they are disturbing. Secondly, to push the pawns on the queen side. We want to attack on the queen side as black, and also if we could finally place these pawns on a5 and b4, we could maybe play bishop a6, and that's a diagonal, finally an open diagonal, and try to exchange white's bishop, because for white this bishop, the light square bishop, is very powerful. Usually when there are queens on the board, white places the bishop on d3, and with the queen arriving on h5, imagine black castling kingside. That's very dangerous. So a bishop on d3 and the queen appearing on the kingside, it's usually very difficult to defend. That's why this position is a slight edge, it's not so much, and of course, well, black even with the queens on the board will never resign. It's usually an unclear position, but not so easy to play. I think I will delete all the arrows. And let's see now the concrete moves, because you have mentioned f4, f5, but to play f4, f5, first of all, we should prepare our position for an attack. We cannot start attacking when all our pieces are on the back rank. So yes, it's a good plan sometimes to play f5 or h4, h5. That's also a good plan to open the h5 for the h1 rook. But let's start bringing our pieces. After bishop e7, bishop d3, we develop the bishop and castle, knight f2. I have seen this mentioned in the chat, that the knight from f2 could later go to d3 and maybe to c5, maybe. Also, it was possible, of course, to place the knight on c3 or on e3. It depends on your taste, it depends on what your plan is going to be. So knight f2 is one way of playing this position, and this is already not theory. This is, I think maybe the new move was here queen takes d2 because I have seen another game with b4, but anyway, we don't care about the opening. Let's go back to our position with the knight on f2. So we are developing our pieces, we have connected our rooks, and after knight b6, this position might ring a bell, and you might connect it to the previous game that we have seen, because there was a tiny little move that I loved and it made a lot of sense to play that move. Do you remember that move? And if you remember it, just pay attention to this position. Why do you think that move would make sense here? Let's see. Good job, guys. b3 is a very useful move in this position too, not only in the previous game. Why? This knight from b6 is about to jump to c4. And yes, it's true that we can capture it, but remember that this is our most beautiful bishop in this position. The light square bishop in the French defense as white is the bishop you always want to keep. You never want to trade this bishop, especially not for the c8 bishop. So if you can prevent the trade of these bishops, then it's better. Sometimes you will have to give it up, so don't take my words all the time literally. Sometimes you will need to give up this bishop, but if you can keep it, then do it. b3 prevents knight c4. We don't want the knight to jump to c4, and it's not only about giving up the bishop, but let's just place any weird move on the board and show that after bishop takes c4, it's not only that we give up the bishop, but we also open the b file for the black rook. And now I really prefer black's position because he has a semi-open b file. He can double rooks on the b file, and after doubling rooks, let's just imagine, let's say bishop d7, rook to b7, the other rook to b8, he would be threatening bishop takes a3, because even though the b2 pawn is defended, actually already, after doubling rooks, just imagine that there are two rooks on the b file, and the problem will be that, yes, the b2 pawn is protected, but the b1 rook would be hanging, so bishop takes a3 would take advantage of the pin once we double rooks on the b file. And even, of course, without that, if white manages to prevent it, it means that it is black who is attacking and white who is defending. We want to be attacking as white, so don't allow your opponent to jump to c4 with his knight. That's a beautiful spot for the knight. Don't let it. b3, preventing knight c4, very, very important move. But hey, you have just blundered the a3 pawn. Yes, Svidler has blundered the a3 pawn on purpose. So why does he blunder this pawn? Bishop takes a3. There's nothing concrete in a way that you are not winning a bishop. This is a positional pawn sacrifice, and the point is that after bishop takes a3, he just wanted to play b4, trapping the bishop. And yes, now black can play knight c4, but you will not take this knight. You let it stay alive, you just move the king, and you are playing against the a3 bishop, because the knight on c4 is beautiful, I agree, and this position would be lovely for black if the bishop was on e7, but it isn't. The problem of black here is that yes, he has a pawn up, but his bishop on a3 is more than awkward. Our threat could be to place the rook on b3 and then capture the knight on c4 and win the bishop. We are not winning the bishop because black can save it, for instance, by playing a4 right now, a5, sorry. So he opens the diagonal, but it means that he gives up the b5 pawn, and now it is white once again who is better. We have regained our pawn down. We have active pieces, the d4 bishop, the d3 bishop, and the h1 rook is about to join the queen side as well. We can go rook b1 next move. So we are actually very happy here, rook b1 or rook a1. doesn't matter whether it's rook takes b5 or not, we will activate the other rook as well. So the position here after knight c4 check, king e2 is not easy for black, because what do you do with this a3 bishop if you don't want to give back the pawn? If you don't want to play a5, how do you get this bishop out of a3? There's just no way. Yeah, since there's no immediate threat, you can play rook d8. And here, maybe rook b3 is not the best move, because after a5, b takes, black can play b4, and now this is an unclear position. Black is threatening knight takes a5, and the rook on b3 is awkward. We don't want to take this, because after d takes c4 we would lose a piece. Both the rook and the bishop would be hanging. So this could be a mess. Remember that when you have a comfortable position, don't go for concrete lines that lead to an unclear position, that lead to mess, crazy positions. Go for something that is comfortable. Rook hd1 improves the only piece that was not developed. Now all the white pieces are happy. And yes, we are a pawn down, but can the bishop move from a3? No, it will not disappear. It will remain on a3 forever. So this is a very nice position for white, because you can play rook b1, rook b3 any time. You can play for this rook b3 bishop takes c4 threat anytime. You can prepare it as much as you want. So probably next move we will go rook b3, because we have developed all our pieces. Then we play rook b3, and black will have to go a5 if he doesn't want to lose a piece. So that's the whole point, that b3 prevents knight c4, blunders a pawn on purpose. And Matthias Bluebaum, who is a young German grandmaster, did not capture the pawn. He thought it was safer to play bishop d7, develop as well. It's important to develop your pieces. And now, even if it's ugly, you have to protect this pawn already. It's not a problem to play rook a1 here in this position. Why is it not a problem? Because the position is basically closed. Yes, there's a semi-open c5 and a semi-open d5, but all the rest of the pawns are on the board and the rooks are not doing much. So in closed positions, you do have time for maneuvering, for slow positions. If this was a position with lots of dynamics and attack against the king, you don't have time for such moves as rook a1, but here you can play rook a1 and maybe 5 moves later you will activate the rook again. It's possible. Bishop c6 and bishop e2 is a move that I also like a lot, because yes, it's nice to have the bishop on d3, but without having a queen that could potentially threaten mate on h7, it's not so much the bishop in itself. And the knight on f2 doesn't have a good square to jump to. We could go knight g4, but then what next? Maybe knight e3? It's also possible, I'm not saying it's bad, but I do like a lot Peter's idea. Bishop c6, bishop e2, freeing the d3 square for the knight. Some of you have mentioned this in the chat already when we were discussing this French type of position, that yes, the knight from d1 could go to f2, d3 and then to c5, and why not? We might jump to c5. Just because normally white attacks on the king side, it doesn't mean that you cannot look at the queen side. Sometimes white will attack on the queen side. We will see if in this game, but it can happen. a5, black is expanding on the queen side, that's what he should do. And white on the king side, h4, and the idea, as mentioned before, h4, h5, h6. Let's open the h5 for the rook. Knight d7, knight d3. This prevents any kind of jumps. You see that knight b6 was prevented by b3, I mean the knight c4 jump. And now, once the knight goes back to d7, and it would want to jump to c5, and from c5 it can jump to e4. Careful about that, it might end up on e4, and that's not really nice for white. So let's prevent knight c5 or bishop c5 by playing knight d3, taking control of the c5 square, improving our pieces. The knight is better on d3, and then we will go h5. Remember that we are not in a rush. This is a closed position, and since we have more space, it's better to keep as many pieces on the board as possible. So let's not trade pieces. b4. This move might be a mistake. Maybe it was better to play rook fc8 for black. Well, it's not so easy to play this. I know from my own experience that it's not so easy to just sit back and wait for white to do something. Rook f8 would develop the rook. That's of course a nice thing to do, but at the same time as black you are feeling like you should do something active, you should do something. So that's why b4 in one way is logical. He wants to open lines on the queen side. A takes, and rook a7. This is the disadvantage of pushing b4. So you want to play on the queen side, you are opening lines, files, ranks, diagonals on the queen side, but it is opening the a file for the white rook. So yes, white was about to play on the king side, but now after rook a7, I mean, who would not love to have a rook on the 7th rank? Rook a7, we can double rooks on the a file, we control the 7th rank. This is beautiful, right? So we are not only playing on the king side, probably now we will play on the queen side. It doesn't matter that normally that's not where you play as white. Our bishop is pointing in both directions, so you can play on the queen side too. The knight is attacking the b4 pawn and controlling the c5 square. So we have basically all our pieces centralized, and that means that you can choose both flanks. You can play on both flanks. Bishop b5 was played. That was the idea behind b4. So you create some space for the bishop, you open files, and also you create space for the bishop, for the bad bishop. And I told you that you want to activate this bishop. It's true that now the bishop is a lot better than it was on c8, but it was for the price of this rook appearing on a7. Bishop g4 is a move that once again I love, because if you remember something is that we want to keep this e2 bishop. Black is not threatening to capture on e2, but imagine that you will want to improve your position. You don't want to keep your knight forever on d3. So for that, in the future, you will need to move away the bishop from e2. And more importantly, bishop g4 is threatening with something. Something that you have mentioned also when we discussed the position. f4, f5 is a threat. Let's just make a move. Let's say rook f8, f5 we could play immediately, and after e takes, bishop takes. Look at this position. Our bishops are very active. The knight too can jump in many directions, control the c5 square, the rook on the 7th rank, and we can push e6 too. So this position is opening up for our pieces. If you have active pieces, open the position, because it means that once the position is open, the opponent will have very awkward pieces or passive pieces. So here, bishop g4, it's a real threat. f5. Black has to go g6, but once you play g6 as black, now we go for plan B, h5. So yes, f5 was prevented, but we opened the h file for the h rook. We are playing on both flanks with centralized pieces and space up. This is really possible. Rook f8, h takes, and knight f2. Maybe this is the only move that was not the most precise from Peter's play, because this knight on d3, I loved. It takes control of the c5 square, so it really makes these pieces passive. You can't really do much about those pieces as black. Maybe it was better just simply to double rooks on the a file, but yeah, it's true that what's next? It's a beautiful position as white, but it's not such a big advantage. It's still a tiny advantage. So we are not winning as white. We simply are much more comfortable. And you should find a plan here. So Peter plays knight f2 because he wants to do something. The only problem is that he loses the grip with this move. And now after bishop c5, black starts trading pieces. Bishop takes, knight takes. And yes, it's true that that bishop was supposed to be our bad bishop, but we love that bishop on d4. It was not a bad bishop, so we would have preferred to keep that bishop, and in general to keep as many pieces as possible. Anyway, the position is still better for white, so let's see how Peter won it. Bishop f3, rook a8, and now an important move, rook c7, because even if the rook goes back to c8, either this rook or the other rook, doesn't matter. Now you trade rooks, because after trading on the c file, you have the a5 for your other rook. So in positions like this, yes, we would love to keep the rook on the 7th rank, but if you can't, then just make sure that at least your other rook will have the a file. And after trading rooks on c8, rook a1, bishop a6, and now rook a5. Look at that rook, controlling the a file, and also putting pressure on the c5 knight. So all the black pieces are tied up. The knight cannot move because the a6 bishop would be hanging. The rook cannot move because the c5 knight would be hanging. I love positions like this. Rook c6, of course, trying to keep everything together. But now king e3. And where is this king going? It's going to d4, because that's a square that once there's no pawn on d4, it will always be a perfect outpost for a knight, for a bishop, or for the king in the endgame. That's just a beautiful square. Since there's no c pawn, no pawn can chase away your piece from d4. King f8, of course, black has to bring his king as well. You need to activate your king in the endgames. And knight g4, king e7, king d4 was played. You could have played king d4 earlier too. It doesn't really matter in which order. And now knight d7. I just wanted to mention here that, of course, you can also jump to f6 with the knight, but I prefer what Peter played, that he goes king d4, so you keep both options there possible for you, knight f6 or knight e3. You will not keep the knight on g4, you want to improve it, and after knight e3, look how useful this knight is. You are protecting your only weakness. The c2 pawn, this backward pawn, is your only weakness, so you protect it. And at the same time, you are attacking. What are you attacking? A pawn that's protected by a pawn? Yes, you are attacking a pawn that's protected by a pawn. Because after knight b8, Peter sacrificed. Bishop takes d5. E takes, and knight takes d5. You are a piece down, but only for a moment. You will win it back. King f8 was probably a mistake. Later we will check what black should have played. After knight takes b4, both the rook and the bishop are hanging. Still, it is not over, because if the bishop moves, let's say bishop b7, we can't capture on c6 because our rook will be taken. That's a knight fork. So have we just blundered? This whole thing with bishop takes d5 doesn't work? No, it just means that you have to calculate one move further. The point is that after knight b4, bishop b7, not rook takes c2, sorry, bishop b7, rook b5, attacks once again the bishop, and the rook is still hanging. Now we are really threatening to capture this rook. Also the b8 knight is very poor, so having the rook on b5 is cool. After knight takes b4, black played rook takes c6. I guess that's why he played king f8. That was his whole point, that he would sacrifice some of the material and play rook takes c2. A tricky move, because once again we cannot take it. There's knight c6 in the air. Piece down for white. Okay, you will get it back. So just for the sake of completeness, let's show it that you can get it back, but at the same time you should always calculate all sorts of moves like bishop d3, and in worst case just knight takes b3 or bishop f1, lots of stuffs. Let's not go for this, pointless. What you should do is that after rook takes c2, don't be scared. Yes, there's this knight c6 trick, but why not just take this bishop that's hanging too? And now if knight c6, you attack the rook. And this is not the same story. This is a knight endgame where you are 2 pawns up. So whenever there are tactical motives, especially when it's against your pieces, a knight fork, some attack against your king, the most important thing is that you are not afraid. Just because the opponent has found some brilliant tactics, it doesn't mean that it works. Or it might work partially. Don't believe it. Calculate it. Just because this rook takes c2 is a pretty move, it doesn't mean that suddenly white is not winning anymore. The position is still very good after knight takes a6, because we end up in a rook endgame where we are one pawn up, and not only a pawn up, but we have a very active king and an active rook. So we will simply promote this pawn. This is a winning rook endgame. b4 is of course the move. When you have a passed pawn, just go and advance it. Rook b2, and after king c4 or king c5, this position is winning. Before we see this game until the end, let's just go back to the critical moment when Peter sacrificed a piece on d5. Maybe it was actually better to play rook c5, but anyway, credits for him for going for this piece sacrifice. Knight takes d5, and probably the good move for black was king e6, and after knight takes b4, now bishop b7 and rook b5. This position I think is still better for white. I don't know how much is the advantage, but I do like white here. Black didn't go to e6 with his king because he wanted to play for this rook takes c2 tactical motive. You cannot do it in this position because after knight takes b4, rook takes c2 is just a big mistake. Rook takes a6 is a check. So then you will capture the rook and you are 2 pawns up in a knight endgame. That's why he went king f8, which is a passive move, but he is playing for this tactical motive. Remember, just because there's a tactical motive, and we have a guest. You have actually 3 seconds to guess who is our guest, because I have already announced that I'm in Madrid, in the Chess24 studio of Madrid, and there was some blitz battle going on in the living room. So, Pepe, can you tell us about that?
Hi Anita. Hi guys.
I have seen in the chat that so many people were missing you. Everybody's saying ratatata and baboom.
Yeah, but I've been busy with the Spanish channel nowadays, but I'll be back soon, to do some banter blitz and to blunder a lot of stuff that I'm used to.
Can we get a ratatata from you for Peter Svidler's position?
For Peter Svidler's position?
What do you think about bishop takes d5 here?
Wow, bishop takes d5, that's a huge ratatata. Yeah, but what's the idea? So you, after e takes, knight takes, and then knight takes b4 or something?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And here rook takes c2, and it's still...
rook takes...
Yeah, that's
there's knight c6 coming.
Yeah. Also, if here you go bishop b7, of course we cannot take it immediately, so rook b5. But
okay.
It all works for white.
Alright.
So bishop takes d5, and maybe what black had to do was take, and then king e6. And this is a position that I was trying to analyze. Knight takes b4, and now bishop b7, and trying to keep
but
2
this
pieces.
Looks like good for white. Yeah, you have a lot. But the thing is, you cannot take on c6 now.
Yeah, you should go rook b5, but still, I think that this should be very good for white. I don't know how much better.
You have 3 pawns, and then these 2 passed pawns on b and c. They are so dangerous, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, Anita. I am playing really bad these days.
How was the blitz?
The blitz, I'm crushing my friend.
Oh, alright. Congratulations.
Yeah, but he's just a very weak player. He's 21.
He's a grandmaster?
No,
international master?
International master. No, he's very strong. He's actually really strong in rabbit. And we are actually 4 against 4 or something, so I'm not crushing him.
4-4. Well, then you should play a final game now.
Yeah. That's what I'm gonna do now. So
people are greeting you here in the chat.
Yeah, so I'm gonna leave you with all the guys. Yeah.
Thank you for joining me, Pepe. And people are requesting a new banter-thon.
Yeah, I'm in for everything. Yeah, even 100 hours, not a problem. I wanna die in Chess24 live.
So you guys should write to support@chess24.com requesting a banter-thon by Pepe Cuenca, 100 hours. He has just promised.
Yeah. I promise. I'll die for you. Okay, I'm gonna take just my charger and I'll leave the room, okay?
Thank you guys for joining us.
Yeah, no problem. Enjoy.
Actually, Drunken Lawyer is saying that they once had a coach who said that they should find boom moves. So maybe it's coming from your baboons.
Yeah.
We are inspiring coaches all over the world.
That's nice. Alright, see you.
See you. So that was Pepe Cuenca. For those of you who might not know him, he's a Spanish grandmaster with whom we were commentating on the candidates this spring. You can find it on Chess24's YouTube channel, and mainly he works for the website in Spanish. Of course, he is Spanish, but he's a very funny commentator. And when you see him commentating in English, people usually say that he commentates as if he was a football commentator. He's shouting, he's very emotional. It's fun. It's fun to watch. So let's finish with Peter's game after this baboom. Bishop takes d5, e takes. Let's see the game, because as I said, maybe king e6 was better for black, but still white should be better. And I like that this bishop takes d5 was played by Peter. It's showing that he did not mind entering some kind of complication. Maybe for him it's not complication. Of course, he calculated everything, so he knew that it was all working. Grandmasters don't just sacrifice for the sake of sacrificing. They always know what's happening on the board. For us, the rest of the human beings, it might be more complicated to see all those lines. After b4, as I said, this rook endgame is winning. Let's just see how he won it, because it's very instructive. Of course, you support your passed pawn with the king, and with the rook you will cut the black king. Let's see how. King c4 or king c5, both are good. King e7, e5, rook c2 check, and you go to b4. Of course, if black keeps on giving checks, you go to a5 and then to b6, so you are actually getting closer to where you want. Your king to c7, and then b6, b7, b8. That's basically the plan. The way to prepare it is by placing your rook on c6. Because on a6, first of all, it was disturbing the king. Secondly, you want this rook to be cutting the black king, so it's boxing the black king in. And also, you pave the path of the king to c7. King b6, king c7. Nobody can prevent that, basically. The rook on c6 is perfectly placed. After rook a2 check, king b6, rook a4, black is going for the white pawns at least. I mean, he should do something. He cannot just wait for our promotion. But you have time. Now that your king is on b6, supporting the pawn, very close, you can take your time and protect the f4 pawn. Why not? Rook e4, and now king c7. So this is the perfect place for the king, and the pawn will march to b8. There's just no way to prevent it. g5, and now we don't care anymore about those pawns because our pawn is much faster. b6, after g takes, b7. It's just so bad for black that he cannot do anything like rook b4, because you can either promote your pawn or play rook b6, so he cannot even sacrifice his rook for the pawn. Okay, he can give a check, and then maybe we will take the rook for the pawn, but sometimes you can also cover the pawn. You don't even need to give it up for the rook. Here, yeah, I think with the rook up we can win. So b7, rook takes e5 happened in the game. It's basically, doesn't matter. Now the rook is hanging on f6, so before we promote, we will make sure that we take the f4 pawn, we move the rook. Rook b5, and now this position is winning, but let's see how, because even though it looks like completely winning, you should still be precise with the rook up. The point is that this f pawn will want to be promoted, so black is going with his king, and he pushes f5. After rook f1, going as far as possible from the black king, king e5, and king d7 is a very important move. It's not from this direction where you want. It might be winning too. Okay, it is winning too. But I want to show you that this is a lot more instructive and much more logical. That you go from here, and black resign because there's just no point in playing this. I show you why. King e4, let's say. So black is trying to get as close as possible, or f4. The two will lead to the same. King e6, and now f4, and you go king f6. So what we did with our king is that we are going to the other side of the pawn. We couldn't go to the e file nor the d file, but we can get to the g file and attack the black pawn from there. King e3, and now king g5, f3, king g4. We got there. f2 and king g3. That's it. We grab the pawn, and then we hopefully know how to give mate with one single rook. I hope that you like this game. For me, it was, of course, from the one hand, a bit sad to see my favorite opening being crushed. But on the other hand, I was very happy for Peter's victory. Of course, I was cheering for him, and he did a very good tournament. at the European Club Cup in Novi Sad, so he had a very nice tournament, and now he's on fire commentating the World Chess Championship. Round 5 is tomorrow, and make sure that you tell me in the chat about your predictions. What do you think will happen in that game? Will it be Carlsen attacking again, trying to convert? Will he convert, or will it be Karyakin who finally has winning chances? What do you think? Who is going to win the World Chess Championship? And then last but not least, we are not going to see this game because I think you have seen it. But if you haven't seen the game of Richard Rapport against Levon Aronian from the European Club Cup, make sure that you check it because it might have been the move of the year. Rook h1 after c6, rook d4. The rook is hanging on d4, but he doesn't take it. It's a bad move. Bishop takes d4. Rook h1. That's such a beautiful move played by the Hungarian prodigy Rapport, and he did beat Levon Aronian with this beautiful move. So if you haven't seen this game, make sure that you check it. It has been analyzed by so many authors, also on Chess24. So this game is, of course, the most beautiful game from the Club Cup, but since everybody has analyzed it, I didn't want to show it, and it's mainly tactics and attacking, not so much about strategy, but of course, in order to have a winning attack, you need to build it up, you need a winning strategy. Thank you for being here. The next show will be on Tuesday, on the, not the next, but the next rest day of the World Chess Championship, but every rest day there will be live shows, so make sure that you stay here on Chess24 even when there's no Carlsen Karyakin. Also today there will be more shows, and the next rest day and every rest day. Follow the World Chess Championship here on Chess24, and please, as I said before, tell me in the chat or in a YouTube comment, what do you think the World Championship will bring? See you soon, see you next week, and enjoy the rest of the championship.